The time has come to act to defend democracy and protect voting rights, even if it means changing Senate rules.
Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer speaking on the Senate floor Monday, one day ahead of President Joe Biden's planned speech in Atlanta, where Biden will push for voting rights legislation. Congressional Democrats and the White House say there's an urgent need to safeguard free and fair elections in the U.S.
The only way to do that are for the Senate to pass the Freedom to Vote Act and the John Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act.
Biden strongly in favor of those two measures, which come after a slew of new laws in many Republican-led states that Democrats say are aimed at making it harder to vote, and as partisan loyalists are installed on election boards. Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell says that isn't true.
If you actually read the legislation that's been passed, it's clearly not the case.
McConnell also says Democrat-backed voting rights legislation is a power grab.
I think this is an excuse to try to break the Senate.
That likely a reference to changing filibuster rules, which is what Democrats would have to do to eliminate the 60-vote threshold and pass the voting rights bills with a simple majority. Biden is prepared to back that move, but Senate Democrats would need the support of every member of their caucus to do it. And two senators are likely to remain opposed, Kyrsten Sinema of Arizona and Joe Manchin of West Virginia.
Bipartisanship takes more than a 51-vote threshold.
I'm Reed Binion for Start Your Day.
All right, they got to get something done, so let's get to our political strategist, Ameshia Cross, for more on the president's push and today's speech. Very important this morning. Ameshia, good morning to you. So Biden will be there. Kamala Harris is going to be in Atlanta, but a lot of these voting rights groups will not be there. They are boycotting this. They want less talk, more action. Do you feel the same way?
Absolutely. And I give so much credit to those organizations who have stood loudly and proudly and said that they're not only not going to show up, but have called out across social media, across the press, just exactly how important it is for action in DC. Many of these groups don't even see the point of Joe Biden and Kamala Harris coming to Georgia. What they need to do is make sure that they are advocating and that they are pushing against the current formation of the filibuster. They're, helping to advocate for that carve out of the filibuster at the federal level in DC. Any moment they're taken away from DC is a moment that they're taking away from actually making this happen. Those advocates and those advocacy organizations and civil rights groups and voters across the state of Georgia did what they needed to do in November of 2020. They were promised that these election challenges, that this debate, this conversation about election fraud, all of these things would come to bear with the fruition of a John Lewis Voting Rights Act, with the fruition of ensuring that their voting rights are upheld, that the Freedom to Vote Act is actually upheld, that passes. And what they've seen thus far is a lot of promises, not a lot of action, and they actually saw voting rights be put on the back burner for the Build Back Better agenda, and only when that agenda fell flat on its face did voting rights become a priority for the administration.
So you're saying it's more about the priority and not actually trying to get something done because, we know how politics work. Of course, you've been in D.C. for a long period of time. We all have taken a civics class. It's like the president has some power, obviously, but he still needs the Senate to take care of the business they need to take care of. And it's not just a 50-50 thing when you have the filibuster you have to deal with here. And obviously, Joe Manchin and Kyrsten Sinema. So what more do you want to see out of President Biden to convince those two senators that they need to get something done in D.C.?
Well, I think that one of the things that we have to see is for Joe Biden, someone who got into this office, basically energizing America around making America better than it had been before, making America walk into this stage of everyone, democracy being for everyone, making America stronger, but also being very strategic about the soul of America. The soul of America right now, this battle for the soul of America is happening in places like the state of Georgia, where Black people, where indigent populations, where college age populations are being denied the right to vote based on the fact that Republicans don't want to accept that Donald Trump lost in 2020. I think that what we have to see from this president, one who has shown time and time again that he was not for any changes to the filibuster, him deciding that now he wants to see that is actually a very new thing. And it's not just Kyrsten Sinema and Joe Manchin. The issue of filibuster change has also come up with people like Chris Coons. There are other Democrats within within the flank who also don't agree with filibuster change, just because they believe that once that pendulum clock swings to the other direction, Republicans are going to use it as well. Thing is, Republicans have already used it. So I don't really understand why going nuclear, using the nuclear option is such a problem for Democrats when Republicans use it to push through Supreme Court justices. They've used it to thwart Obama legislation during the Obama era. And we're seeing them right now hyper vigilant in stripping people of their voting rights across the country.
So you want to see a more forceful Joe Biden, President Biden, like you saw last week when he was addressing during January 6th, when he came straight after former President Trump when it came to the insurrectionists. Do you want to see a more fighting type of Joe Biden when it comes to this and stop trying to be such a bipartisan? Because obviously we see that the GOP is not trying to, and they don't want to cooperate, even if it means for the betterment of the country. You see this with the Build Back Better plan. Obviously, Joe Manchin is stopping that as well. Do you think that Biden has finally gotten to the point where he knows that he's not going to get any kind of bipartisanship and that the Republicans aren't going to be there to help him out with any of his legislation?
If the speech that most recently marked the tragedy that the insurrection was, the speech that he just gave last week, is any indication, this is a Joe Biden who fully recognizes the congressional hand he's been dealt, one who fully recognizes that Republicans aren't coming to play, one who fully recognizes the depths of the big lie and the fact that in states across this country there are huge problems with swaths of America who still believe it. But beyond that, he recognizes that Black people are the key to not only his agenda getting passed and ensuring that that happens, but also to saving this democracy. And I think that at this point, the recognition is he's going to have to do what he has to do to ensure that right to vote. And if you're going to talk about saving our democracy, it can't just be commemorations of what happened last January. There has to be a conversation about the bedrock of our democracy, because when you deny people the right to vote, you do not have a democratic government. Free and fair elections is a core bedrock of that entire democracy. Without that, we do not have one. And I think that Joe Biden is here, basically, he's going to Georgia to re-emphasize that. And he's going to talk about, in the vein of MLK, he's going to talk about voting rights access. But again, those Georgia voters did what they had to do. Those advocates did what they had to do. You cannot advocate, march, protest your way out of voter suppression. There has to be a federal level intervention, and that's what they're looking for now.
Yeah, we'll see if it hits its points with the Freedom to Vote Act and John Lewis voting rights bill as well. So we got the relief package done. He got infrastructure, Build Back Better plan. They're not even negotiating anymore right now. Voting rights a priority, trying to get that done right here before January 17th, I believe that is Martin Luther King Day, and of course George Floyd Justice and Policing Act. We're talking about voting rights and George Floyd Justice and Policing Act when it comes to Black people, right? Things that have not gotten done that Joe Biden promised, the president promised to get done for Black people in particular here. We know about the suppression issues that are going on in 19 states, 34 of these laws going on in these 19 states right now, midterms right around the corner. If he does not get something done, even if he does, let's say he does get voting rights done, will it be too little too late to energize this base of Black voters in time to make something happen when it comes to the midterms to try and secure, to maintain the House and the Senate?
That's a great question. And voter suppression is a large problem. It is not the largest problem for Joe Biden. Joe Biden's other problem is the fact that Black people specifically feel as though they were sold a false bill of goods. We're seeing that the recovery efforts, especially job recovery, has not matched for Black people what it has for whites or other races of people. We've seen that time and time again. There's still a lot of unemployed Blacks. COVID-19 has hit the Black population and at stark rates at levels higher than it has any other group. We're watching that happen on a daily basis. There are just so many policy areas that affect Black people directly that at the end of the day, they're very upset because they don't see a reason to also come out and continue to support. So I think that he's going to have to really fall back on some of the COVID relief, talk about the child tax credits, do this push. At the end of the day, Democrats care about what they got. Voters care about what they got, not what you tried to do. So I think that there's a problematic piece that in the Senate, the margins are as slim as they are, but that's not going to get you any wins on the campaign trail. The conversation is going to be largely about what you promised when you ran in 2020 and what was actually accomplished since you actually been in this office. And I think that that's going to be a huge thing. We're looking at those approval ratings for Biden. One of the strong reasons I believe that we know that Stacey Abrams is not going to be present today when he goes down to Georgia is because his approval ratings are, quite frankly, in the hole. It doesn't help her or behoove her to be there when her approval ratings are a lot higher, even though she's a non-elected, and because she, quite frankly, is in many ways seen as the face of the party for Black people. So I think that, that says a lot about where we are.
Yeah, she's running for governor. She did send out a tweet in support, but she can't be there. She said it's a scheduling conflict, but obviously there might be some other reasons as well. Less of this, more action. We'll see what he says today to try and get this base energized and try and get something done before his self-imposed deadline once again of MLK Day. Always love talking to you, political strategist, BNC contributor Ameshia Cross. That knowledge is great for us. Thanks for the insight. We appreciate you.